Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today I'm going to work on something I've had some requests for, the anatomy and how to service a rear drag fishing reel. These don't come into my shop that often. They differ. Most of the reels that we see today have the top drag system where the drags are located in the spool. This differs in that the drags are located below the case. And this is just a generic graphite rear drag fishing reel, and it differs in the way it puts tension onto the on the spool shaft to enable the reel to play fish with the drag. It has an adjuster typically that's on the bottom that helps you to set it and forget it sort of movement, and the drags are contained below the reel. So we'll take it apart. I'll show you how this thing is set up and how to service one of these if you have it. Now, quite honestly, I don't get a lot of these in the shop. They're usually on the lower end of the pricing scale. They probably start at $20 and maybe work their way up to $30 or $40, but the higher end reels do not utilize that bottom drag system. They typically will use the top drag system for the more expensive reels. So what happens is, because of the cost to service a particular fishing reel, these are almost viewed as disposable, in that if it comes time to service it, instead of spending $15 or $20 to service the reel, most of the time these reels are just put aside and just get a new one. Okay, so I've taken off the handle, which is generally the way I start. A difference on the spool for the bottom drags is typically this is just a push button spool that is removed, and there's no servicing involved with the spool up top. It's sort of like the older Mitchell systems, or that with spinning reels, although the drags were up top in the Mitchells. Okay, so to take off the drag components is next, and you'll notice I'm wearing a protective glove on my hand to keep the stuff out of the lubricants and that off my hand. You'll also notice I'm using a parts tray. In this case, that parts tray is just the bottom of a milk jug. But what I'm showing you here is essentially everything that's rear drag, and regardless of the size, they're all pretty much set up the same way. So there's a retaining screw that holds this cap on, and the cap generally is screwed on, so you reverse thread the screw. And then you'll typically have some kind of a retaining clip that holds the settings in place. In this case, it looks like we have a clip that goes through on both sides. It's got a little indentation here that's going to catch that toothed ratchet there that's going to make the noise. And it is a spring. So I always tell you, with the springs, be very careful when you remove them so that they don't shoot. And I'd be lying if I said that wasn't learned from experience, because there's a lot of tension on these springs. And you can see here how it's loaded. So make a note of this. Make a note that this one was through the one side, this bottom portion was through the other side, and set that into the parts basket. I always recommend folks take pictures if you haven't worked on a reel like this, or it's your first time, or you're just not familiar with the setups. Take pictures so that you know when it comes time to reassemble the sequence that they came off in, and then what goes next, sort of a thing. So there's a cap here that holds a spring, should hold a spring. Yeah, okay, here's our drag assembly then. That holds a spring. That's next up, and I'm just going to lay these on the table so you can see. And then, almost like the top deck of a top-loaded drag system, we'll have a series of metal and fabric washers or some other type of an arrangement. In this case, we have the eared washer, and we have a fabric washer, another a round washer, not with the ear, that came off the bottom, another fabric. And so another reason why these things become almost disposable is that parts are generally not available for them. And this is a generic reel. I wouldn't even know where you would find one to do that. So this is how it's set up, and then this is the cap that these sit on. So what you're doing in a service, basically, you're just going to look, make sure that they're well lubricated, and that these fabric washers, the three of these, are flexible, and in this case they are. So I'm just going to restack these. So it goes just the inverse of the way we took these out. The round one goes in the center here, a little bit different than the way we see some other drag stacks where the keyed one's in the center there. Okay. That's pretty much the way that sits. And we'll have a spring sit on top of that, and then we'll have the cap that goes over it. So just wanted to lay that out for you so you knew how that went. I'm just going to set those aside in the basket as well. And let's get underneath here and just show you the inner workings then. So there's 4 screws. I notice in this case this one's missing one. We'll go back and find one later. I got this one a while ago. It's just been sitting aside from my parts bin, and I just got this request to say, can you show us how the rear drags work? So I thought, why not just grab this one? So it's missing a long screw. I'll find one after the video. There's no sense spending a lot of time here trying to figure out where that is. Okay, so we have 3. As many of you know, I just lay them out to make sure that they're all the same size on the side plate screws, and in this case they are. They go in, and then we should be able to pull that off, and we are. Okay, so in this one, again, it's a relatively simple concept here in terms of the way that this flows. We have a bushing, we have a main gear, and this one has got the crosswind block below, so we're going to have to take the shaft off to get to that. In order to do that, we want to lower the shaft down. You do that by rotating the main gear until you get it into the position where it's at the low. And this one has an E-clip to it that's holding the main gear in place. Okay, so we're going to remove that then. And grab that clip. There's sitting behind us here. And that should just fold out. Just looking for a screwdriver to give me some leverage. There we go. Okay, so you can see that it's got the 2 C-clips on there that just presses in. Then we can pull the main shaft out, just like we do with a lot of different types of fishing reels. We can pull the main gear out. We'll notice we have the bushing on the other side. We have the main gear, which has got some crud on it, so we'll clean that up. Then we have the carrier, crosswind block, and the crosswind gear bushing behind there. This is the anti-reverse override. So we're just going to take the top off while I have these pieces out. I'm going to reset this bushing into the side plate here. Just so we don't lose it. And these bushings have little studs on them. It's hard to see here, but there are indentations, and those studs go into those indentations to hold this bushing into place. Crosswind block. And a lot of times it's good if you have these types of mechanical clasps here that are holding the shaft in place. Sometimes it's good just to put that clip right back on the shaft so you don't lose it. And that's what I'll do here. All right, and then I'm just going to put the main gear in there, and we'll go back and clean that up in a moment. But let's just stay up top here now, take this off. And this is looks like a 14mm nut. It is, and it has the traditional counterclockwise turn for the removal of it. Some of them are not, some of those are an anti or backwards kind of a thing. And this has 1 ball bearing in it, so that's good to see. Again, there's a little bit of junk on there, so I'm going to hit it quickly with some WD-40 just to loosen it up. You notice the overspray came on my glove here, and that's one of the reasons why I wear that glove, is to keep that contained. Okay, so we just cleaned that up there. And if you needed to take the ball bearing out, you could remove the 2 screws here and pop the whole shaft up. But we're not going to go do that. And actually it looks like it's a bushing, not a bearing. It is a bushing. Okay, so if you needed to remove that assembly, you could. Just put a little bit of oil on that. This is another sign why these reels are a little bit less expensive. That's not a brass, that's just some kind of basic, what I call pot metal. It's just a basic metal, machine metal. It's not the higher end kind of a metal componentry in there. Okay, once I get that, we'll go tighten that up, give it a spin just to make sure it's spinning nicely, which it is. And then we're going to go put some grease on this. I'm going to use a reel grease. I use a Penn Precision reel grease, but quite honestly, there's plenty of reel greases out there on the marketplace, and any grease that's made for fishing reels is appropriate. So I'm going to go ahead and get that onto the pinion gear. Also, at this time, just going to put a little bit of oil onto the assembly that works the anti-reverse. As you can see, that anti-reverse catches teeth on that pinion gear. That's what's stopping it. Sometimes on the older reels you'll have slots inside, but in this case the anti-reverse is pretty simple with that. Okay, so let's go back to that main gear then. A couple of things you want to note. There's a V-shaped wedge here on the back. That's going to seat that anti-reverse. So we're going to have to show you how to get that done. We'll do that in just a moment here after we clean up this dried up lubricant. Do the same on this side. Get that all nice and clean. Okay, and then there's a window on this gear, right? You can look through. So what you want to do is you want to line that V up with the window, and the window's kind of your view into the soul of this reel, if you will. You're going to take that and you're going to line the V with the bottom of this stud on the anti-reverse. That's what's going to help you to get it situated so that the anti-reverse works. And I'm not sure if the camera is able to pick that up, but this is properly seated at the moment. If you look through that window there, you can see the V on both sides. Okay, once that's set up, we can go back and put that main spool in. And go take that clip off, just lay that to the side. We're going to reinsert the spool, which is going to ride down into the shaft there. Oops, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I didn't put the crosswind gear back in. Okay, a little bit of grease onto the back of the crosswind gear, and a little bit into the teeth. Looking for the bushing. Again, there's another bushing that goes in the back of this. It's plastic. Again, another reason if you're looking why reels get less expensive, that's another reason for that cause, is that we can insert the cause of it being inexpensive is that the reel uses plastic bushings, not brass bushings, or other components that cut down on the expense. For whatever reason, I'm going out of sequence. So let's just back up and give you a chance to see that other piece again. Just reseating that bushing. I'm having a little bit of difficulty. So that the ridge is realigned in here. And you'll know when you'll get it, because it's the only way it can lay flat. Ridge is in, this is in. We'll put a little bit of grease on the front side of the crosswind block to help the crosswind gear to help the crosswind block. And we're going to set that at the bottom. Now we can put the main gear back in. Again, we need to have that V sitting on the back here. We have the window to look through, and we need to grab that that little tag end that's coming off the anti-reverse in order to properly seat that. And in this case, we can actually move it with a small screwdriver to get it set, and again, that's set properly. Now we can come back with the main shaft. Okay, the shaft is in. and grab the C-clips. And again, pretty standard here for the reel and any others. Now, this is a generic one. I imagine if you were to go search this out, this one's called a, I'll find out in a moment what it's called. I'm trying to set the C-clip in here. All right, now we're set in there with the C-clip. Okay, so this one, it's called a Master, a Meg Master. So we can figure that out. It's probably a department store brand or something else. They made one-shot deals. You can't find parts for them. You know, that becomes a problem. But you know, this is a 60 size. It's a 1660 is the actual limiting on it. The 60 tells you it's a 60 size. And the 60 size reel is a good medium size reel. A lot of folks ask me what's the ideal size for a fishing reel. And you know, you got everything from the very small ones, the 10s and the 20s, freshwater, all the way up to the 80s and the 90s for big saltwater fish. And everybody, especially somebody new to it, said, what size reel should I get? And I like to point them to the 40s and the 50s, right in the middle. It gives you good versatility for pier, for boat, for surf, and size fish. It's for pretty good size fish, lake, ocean, inshore, bay. 50s, I guess, would be my favorite that I would recommend here in the Northeast, just because of the types of fishing that we do here. But these are mid-range reel sizes, and they're generally good for a little bit of everything. Okay, now we're back to putting that rear drag in. I showed you how that assembly came together before, and what we do now is we want to load this. There's two big slots here. That's where the ears from this go. So you want to line the ears with the spool shaft, and then you can generally drop these down in. And I'm not aligned at the moment. Okay, we're in now, and I'm going in backwards, kind of going in piece by piece now instead of just putting the whole assembly in. That's okay, doesn't matter. And you can see how they're just sitting in there the way that they came out. And the last of the eared washers goes in. And again, those ear washers sit in those grooves. Next up would be the spring. And the spring is sitting in the cup here, so that just gets in there. And then we have that retaining spring that we had all along there. Now, if you remember how this came out, it came out with this one being in that groove, and then the point of this one being down here inside this, the cutout here. So I'm going to set that into the groove first. Again, it's a spring, so I'm going to get real careful about that, holding it down. And then I'm going to poke it, and I'm going to just rotate it a little bit until we catch that groove on the other side. Okay, we're in now. You can see the groove. So you just have to play around with it a little bit. And we're basically coming down to the end of it now. We take that cap that we had, we re-screw that back on. Tighten it up. Put the retaining screw back into the cap. And we have a properly lubricated reel that will go around and last a long time. I like to put a drop of oil onto the bail assembly as well, just to keep that free flowing there. Sometimes that gets a lot of gunk buildup in it, but we're good for now. And put the handle back in. Grab that. And the last thing we'll do is put the assembly on. So we've showed you basically the whole thing, how it all works there, how you take it apart, how you service it, how it's different from the top-loaded drags. And, you know, it's a personal preference. Which one do you like? There we go. All right, so we're on our way. We have the backstop working, which was the little bit of the window I was showing you how to load that up. We're tightened down, so yep, the drag is pretty tight there, and you can always, there we go, it's not moving now. And if you want to back that off, you turn below, you can hear that spring clicking as you turn, and that'll loosen the drag up. And then of course, if you just go back the other way, then you can't move it. So that's a rear drag system, generic wheel. I hope you've learned a couple of things from this one about how they come together, how to service them, and the general purpose of these wheels. So with that, I'm going to end the video. Thank you for watching it. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.